is episode 3 of Southern Fried Asian. Once again, I am your host, Keith Chow. Thank you for all the love and support you've shown this podcast over the first 2 episodes. That's greatly appreciated. I'm excited for today's. Quick disclaimer, even though this is episode 3, this was the very first interview I ever conducted for Southern Fried Asian. Our guest of honor this week is the North Carolina-based rapper G Yamazawa. You may know him for his viral YouTube videos. His latest hit album is Shouts of Durham, which you can download on Apple iTunes. Representing North Cack, here's my conversation with G Yamazawa.
It's the North Cack, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the law. It's the North Cack, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the law. I'm the truth, man, looking real false. Whenever I hit the booth, I come out to an applause. If I'm talking to my crew, you heard a southern drawl. Yo, I ain't talking to you, stop eavesdropping the ball. I be rocking with
Today's guest on Southern Fried Asian is a writer, a poet, a musician, a rapper. He is an all-around Renaissance man representing North Carolina. Please welcome to the show, G Yamazawa.
Hey, you're too kind.
What's
too
up,
kind.
G?
Chilling, man. How are you?
I'm well. I want to first thank you for representing the South, being out there repping North Cack.
Hi.
People I speak to sometimes they don't even know what like cackalack means. Can you quickly just give a background of where that nickname came from?
It's just the Carolinas, man. I feel bad. I feel like South Carolina gets left out of the conversation sometimes. I do feel bad about that. But I got love for both all the Carolinas and
all the cats.
Yes, all the cat. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, welcome to Southern Fried Asian. You are the southernest, most fried Asian I know.
It's an honor, man. It's an honor.
So it's great to have you. I want to talk to you about a lot of things, primarily just like growing up in North Carolina. You know, you're from Durham. I'm assuming that's what it sounds like you're from, listening to the album. I hope you're not fronting about where you're really from.
Durham and surrounding Pittsboro, Chatham County areas as well.
Right.
It's a little more rural, a little more country, but yeah, I was born at Durham Regional Hospital. Went to Southwest Elementary School, went to Githens Middle School, Jordan High School. Also got kicked out, went to Lakeview Alternative School in Bragtown. Shouts to Bragtown. Also went to Durham Technical Community College. So
man, I wasn't expecting the resume, man. Come on now.
You know, I feel like it's shouts to all the Durhamites out there.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. Like growing up in Durham, I mean, Durham's kind of like a college town. It's like it's not as
right.
Like if you think about like there's probably more. You're more likely to run into other Asian folk in Durham than other parts of the Cackalacks, right?
Well, I would say Chapel Hill also. I mean,
Yeah.
Chapel Hill is definitely more of a college town. Duke is a bit secluded, has kind of its own ecosystem, I would say.
Yeah, that's
but,
true.
Yeah, but Durham, I think Duke sometimes overshadows the historical piece of Durham as being, one amazing sort of city and town for black entrepreneurship,
right.
And Black Wall Street and stuff. So, yeah, Durham has a definitely complex identity, but I feel like there's a lot of harmony in Durham for sure.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny that like Duke University definitely has a reputation.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave it at that. Leave it at that. We won't go down that rabbit hole. As an Asian American though, like one of the premises behind this whole podcast is kind of like bringing to light these stories about what it's like growing up Asian in parts that aren't typically associated with like the Asian American narrative. New York City's Chinatown, San Francisco Bay Area. Anytime you pop in an Asian American movie, it's going to be in those 2 cities. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I was telling you before we started recording, I got hip to you with your 10 Things About Being Asian in the South poem. That was blowing up on YouTube in my family for sure. That got passed around a lot because we all come from Virginia and parts south. So talk a little bit about that juxtaposition about being Asian American and yet also fully repping the South.
Well, as I was thinking about it while you were asking the question, I think also the South, it's one thing to think of yourself with an Asian American sort of identity, but I feel like the South, when you think about just American like dynamics, the South also gets really shitted on. Can I cuss on this podcast?
Yeah, we're gonna go for that E on
right.
iTunes, so it's all good.
All right, cool. Yeah, I mean, the South often gets underrepresented, misrepresented, overlooked as well. So it's an interesting sort of, identity crisis, if you will, to kind of have to be repping against the odds. And yeah, I mean, I think it's everyone's sort of searching for their own sense of identity. And for me, it's been honestly a really great experience and process in trying to understand what it really meant for me to grow up in a place like that in this time, in this day and age,
right.
With the kind of globalized structure we live in and with the sort of stories that are being told. I think everyone's story is really amazing and important, no matter what. If you're Asian, whoever you are, whatever background you come from. So yeah, I think it definitely makes people's heads turn because it's a unique narrative for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even the idea of, and I think I got some years on you. I might be a little bit older than you, but like, coming up, when I came up, I was born in the late 70s, grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the idea of even being Asian American was not something I discovered about myself until I started college. Right. I use this whenever I speak to schools. I use this, and I do comics and stuff, and that's kind of how I weaseled my way into the Asian American arts community, just through comic books. And I do this, I tell folks that, like, for me, going to college was like going to Xavier School for me, because growing up, I didn't realize I was a mutant. I didn't realize I just had these abilities that I tried to keep from people, and everyone shunned me anyway. And then I went to this school and I found others who had this, and I realized, oh my God, we're the X-Men.
Right.
You know what I mean?
What school did you go to?
I went to Old Dominion University in Norfolk.
Oh, dope. Oh, very dope. Yeah.
And and that's the thing too. Like I went from a small town in Virginia where there weren't any Asian people. Like, that's why I wasn't even Asian when I was a kid. Like, I was Chinese.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know anything about being Asian. And then like the town, as most people think about, it was you were either white or you were black, and you didn't pick sides, right? Like, I remember that line from the poem. And when I moved to a little bit larger town where you had there's a Filipino population, there was more than one Chinese spot. It was a bit of a culture shock for me that there were other Asian folk. But how do you bump up against that? I don't know what the demographics were for Japanese people in Durham and parts surrounding, but did you bump up against some of those similar things where there weren't a lot of other Asian American people to identify with, or how did you grow up?
For sure. I mean, definitely exact same thing. Especially when I was in more of rural Carolina. Mm. But I have an interesting sort of upbringing too, because I grew up practicing Buddhism. Mm. And so, as I got older, middle school, early ages, I would go to these conferences. And where a bunch of young Asian, not young Asian, but young Buddhist people would just come together and learn about the practice. And it's a super diverse, but there's also definitely a big Asian American demographic in the Buddhist community,
right?
The SGI community. So, and my sister also went to school in Southern California. So when I was 10, 11 years old, I went out to California and I was like, oh my gosh. It's Asian people everywhere. It's all kind of Asian people, and they're fresh, and and so I was exposed to kind of what Asian American society looked like.
Right.
And so I think that allowed me to at a young age be proud and to know that there were others out there, but that I was in, this secluded area where I had to sort of rep super hard. But yeah.
Was that a conscious thing though, that you were trying to rep being Asian, trying to rep being Japanese, or were you more I made the allusion to the line in the poem where you don't choose sides between white and black, but when you grow up in a small town or in a region of the country where there aren't a lot of diversity, how did you navigate what was considered white and what was considered black? Because nothing's ever considered Asian. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, you were in a Buddhist community, so that's got some
right
credibility when it comes to being Asian. But you know what I mean? How do you navigate those spaces?
Well, it was definitely through hip hop. Mm. Hip hop had become at a really young age, kind of the way I decided to view the world through. And sort of, I always got hip to this new phrase or way of describing it, but just living with a hip-hop-centric lens.
Right.
And if your culture is really, your culture is like your lens. It's the way that you see the world. And so hip-hop allowed me to sort of live with this counter-narrative to the mainstream, American story. I think everyone gets hip to just sort of whiteness and how whiteness, whether it's subconscious or not, sort of you understand how the upper level of society works and operates and all of that. And then with hip-hop, you're able to see the sort of back end of that. And hip-hop and those communities were the communities that welcomed me and allowed me to be who I was.
Right.
Made it a point to know that it was special, that I was different. And that maybe they don't understand a lot about me. And I didn't understand a lot about Japanese culture, Asian culture at the time either.
Right.
But that nonetheless, if you have a good heart and you're being true to who you are, because hip hop is also very strict about originality and you being who you are, whether you're black or you're not. And so, yeah, it was I think a atmosphere that forced me to really dive deep and think about who I am, which is like, really like this existential crisis when you're like 13, and so I think it just gave me an upper hand now that I'm 26 and now that I'm experiencing the world. And I think that background and that kind of rigorous identity crisis at a young age sort of helped me be able to connect with anybody.
Yeah, that's it's very similar to like a lot of Asian American folks who kind of grow up in this kind of in-between space, right? Because accusation might be too strong a word, but like there is oftentimes if you're Asian and you grow up in a hip-hop-centric lens, you could get accused of like being appropriative. Or how do you make sure that what your hip-hop-centric viewpoint isn't appropriative? Because I feel you, because I grew up in the, I'm a little bit older than you. But, I also kind of found my way through like other communities of color that existed in my neighborhoods. And one of the things about being in the South is that like various parts of the South is like, it is very either like redneck culture is very dominant. But then, people forget like black culture comes from the South. How do you make sure that you're not being appropriative in viewing life that way?
Well, I feel like black culture, it doesn't all come from the South. Like, it evolves and it's constantly moving.
Sure.
Right. But that's a great question. I think it's just sort of, I want to sort of also touch on, like, when you bring up cats like Eddie Wong and things like that.
Right.
It's important to touch on generational, like, just differences.
Yeah.
What time period you come from, what actual neighborhood you grew up in, what sort of realm of work and what kind of field you're in. All of those circumstances really will affect the way society views you.
Yeah.
And I think Rich Chigga is another interesting one to bring up. Aquafina is another interesting one to bring up as well when you're talking about hip hop. I don't know if I necessarily have an answer. I think a good way to answer just a general question of how to not appropriate culture is sort of just being sincere. And I think it's difficult for a third party to decide whether or not they think you're being sincere in terms of their definition of what being appropriative is. And I think it that sincerity is sort of dictated by how much love you genuinely have for the culture, and how much space you really want to take up or not. So yeah, like I think it's a difficult conversation. I'm also sort of not big on pointing fingers and saying somebody's being appropriative when you don't really know their full story. Right.
I think I love your point about sincerity too, because you mentioned that you grew up really connected into the Buddhist community in America, and in America in particular, like you mentioned, it's very diverse. You actually, I find more white Buddhists, around than I see other Asian Buddhists, and I think, but like your point about sincerity is true, because if they're practicing because they really believe in the faith is one thing, and if they're just kind of like dipping their toes in it or kind of wearing it as a costume, that's a whole other level, right? Like that's that's a kind of an insight you have where you see people maybe coming from outside a culture and then kind of immersing themselves in that culture.
Right, and everyone's trying to find their place, man, in the world, and that place evolves and it changes. But I do feel that like identity really is that kind of bottom line to everything. And it's difficult, man. It's difficult to sort of find out, you know, who you are and what you're about and what you stand for and all that.
Yeah, no, I'm actually really envious of your ability to not be cynical, because I can be really cynical about that kind of stuff, but I think that's something to really, I think, strive towards and be able to kind of see past that kind of surface level of where people are really just trying to, like you said, figure out who they are, and sometimes it takes some bumps in the road to figure that out, right?
For sure.
Since you mentioned hip hop and you are a well-renowned hip hop artist, having your debut album chart on iTunes and everything, and your videos just blowing up on all of my social media feeds. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
Who are your hip hop influences? You mentioned that was the kind of like your lens into the culture. Who were the rappers that you kind of looked up to as a 13-year-old kid and continue to inspire you today?
Thick question. You know, different phases of life, I think, are attributed to different artists. Generally speaking, my sister was like 7-8 years older than me, and like I said, so she grew up in a different time as well. But my first sort of introduction to hip hop really was through her, so the huge Lauryn Hill, Fugees, DMX, J, kind of that Def Jam golden era.
Right.
And then also learning about, and then I had to retroactively learn about Slick Rick and Big L, and you know, I was definitely very lyric driven,
right,
listener. But I also love Lil Jon, I love Gucci, I love Jeezy, I love T.I., Outkast, Wayne. I'd say like Kendrick has definitely been a huge soundtrack to my 20s. But yeah, huge J, Nas, Big Pac guy, Bus, Ludacris. Yeah, and I actually wasn't a huge like conscious rapper type guy. You know, I love Common, I love Black Star, I love Black Thought. Yeah, never was like huge, and you know, I wasn't huge in the Tribe. I wasn't huge in the De La. I wasn't huge into you know, Atmosphere, and I love Brother Ali, but you know, I didn't get, you know, too much into underground rap. But yeah, I'd say it's kind of the usual suspects as far as who shaped what, you know, how I viewed rhyming.
But when did you like discover Dirty South hip hop though? Like you mentioned Outkast, you mentioned Luda, like where, because like a lot of your early influence were definitely like New York hip hop.
Yeah.
Did you notice a difference when you started listening to like, you know, more Southern roots hip hop or?
Well, it's interesting. I think the listening came out when I was like 10 or 11. So Little Brother was kind of a big starting point, but, you know, sonically doesn't really fit into to the idea of Southern rap.
Right.
But then, you know, Lil Jon was also at that time as well. And I think, you know, Lil Jon, Pastor Troy, Archie the Messenger, like, you know, Hot Boys, like, that came when I was about 10, 11 years old, 12 years old. But I was sort of, it's a interesting line between what sonically, because Southern music always really drove me sonically, rather than lyrically.
Right.
And sort of Outkast, T.I., those kind of cats really fueled me lyrically. And so I was able to really gravitate towards that. But actually didn't get huge into Southern rap as a whole altogether when I was a kid.
Were there Asian American rappers that you were like? Were you hip to the Mountain Brothers? Did you know about? Like,
I wasn't. I found out about Mountain Brothers. I got connected to Chops recently, but
Chops does the theme song for the podcast, by the way.
Oh, fly! Yeah, he's very dope, very dope. But no, I was just Jen, man. It was just Jen at the time, and you just sort of. I remember watching him for sure on, you know, BT, and I was just like, holy shit, this dude.
You and
but
everybody.
I hated him too because I was like, damn.
I don't want to learn Chinese.
Right? Well, that too, but even before that, just from a like, that was supposed to be me, dog. Like,
right.
You know, and then seeing his career unfold the way it did was interesting as well. But kids these days don't even know who Jen is.
Right, that's right. I mean, that was
great.
He was what, from like, that was like 10 years ago, right? More than that, probably.
Dude, more than that, man. Probably 12,
like,
13, something like that.
Man, Jesus, I told you, I'm old as shit.
Yeah. I mean, kids don't even know who. Outkast is sometimes.
Right.
I go into high schools and I'm just like, whoa, son, you know. And their greatest rappers list is, I don't even know if I can find a word for it, but it's just sort of.
It's let's say current.
Yeah,
they're
but I
best
imagine,
rappers of all time.
You know,
list.
when I'm talking to an old head and I don't put Rakim on my list, they're just, you know, I imagine that's how it feels.
Yeah, well, I was already like ticking off when you were listing names. Like, damn, he didn't. I said Tribe. Like, he didn't mention Tribe. He didn't say Rakim.
Right.
Where's Chuck D in this list?
Right,
it's all good.
right.
But that's like it's a generation thing, right?
Yeah.
I probably need to talk to your sister when it comes to like reminiscing about hip hop.
Right.
But you're also, aside from being a rapper, you're also a poet. You're a national slam champion. You've toured colleges. You've read at the Kennedy Center, at the Pentagon. Like, what are you doing reading poetry at the Pentagon?
Yeah, I actually was invited by the chaplain.
Oh, wow.
And so it was kind of the spiritual sector.
Right.
And, you know, I found in most cases, like most non-artistic creative spaces, corporate or, you know, in this case, military, what have you, you know, people are really pent up. You know, people are really, they really need some kind of entertainment. They need like that connection back to their humanity. And so I found as a poet, have been able to kind of like sneak into these spaces where they didn't even know they needed kind of an emotional release from their everyday, you know. And this is also social justice based places as well. I think that's why social justice spaces and activist spaces and artists are able to find space in those spaces. I said space.
You say space a lot. I think we both say space. I think if we were to do a tally, maybe it's a South thing, man. But how did you like discover poetry? What was your lead into that area? I won't say space.
So Durham has a small but also beautiful poetry community and spoken word scene. And at the time when I was 13, 14, 15, it was much smaller, but nonetheless had connections to the National Poetry Slam, Southern Fried. Chapel Hill had sent a youth poetry team to Brave New Voices, which is the biggest youth poetry competition and festival in the country and world. And so even though it was in a small town, I was able to, I didn't realize it at the time, but they were connected to these larger national communities and even global. And so, I was just doing my thing and met a guy named Dasana Hanu, who's sort of like the guru of the triangle when it comes to poetry, art activism, and he's a Jedi as well. And then also we formed a crew called Sacrificial Poets, based out of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, but also sort of did work all over the state. And we were the first youth poetry organization. It's now a nonprofit and stuff. So, man, I sort of fell into this world. At first, I didn't like it. I was like, man, I'm trying to do this rap shit. And then I think what had happened was I was trying to rap heavy when I was 16, 17. And that's when it was like, that's when Soulja Boy started really going crazy. And that's when I think hip-hop really took a hard turn.
In a different direction.
Yes. And I mean, it was also the Bush administration, too.
Yeah.
And I think I sort of forget about how much that affected, I think, art.
We in it now, though.
Yeah.
we back to that.
Odd sort of cycle, yeah.
So you were rapping first and then kind of like fell into like, poetry
heavy. I
rap.
started rapping super early and wanted to rap. Jim was, during that time, all of that. And then that's when I sort of found poetry, and I was like, wow, this is an amazing community and culture where you're respected and your story is heard, and I want to try to knock out this poetry shit. Like, I get 3 minutes to say whatever I want to say, however I want to say it, maintain a hip-hop-centric sort of lens, maintain that kind of competitive foundation when it comes to competitions and slams and stuff. So it just really fit well. And so when I first went to Brave New Voices, it's a huge festival, young people from everywhere, ciphers with 50 MCs, and it's just all kind of crazy. And I was like, I am nobody, son. Like, I thought I was, the greatest rapper alive, and then was quickly humbled and then just started writing poems from then on.
So when you did Kollaboration back in, was it 2012?
12, yep.
So were you were doing rap or were you doing poetry?
That was poetry.
So like, how did you go from Brave New Voices to Kollaboration?
Oh, that was a long journey. Brave New Voices was about 2008 when I was 17. Okay. That was the first time I went. Long story short, delivered pizzas, went to community college, kept writing poems, and then went on my first tour when I was 20. and this was like a super underground grassroots tour, traveled around the country. We hit like 17 states. This was me and my brother Kane, who's a mentor coming up. And then ended up in D.C. I moved to D.C. When I was 21. That's where I met Jess. Shouts to Jess. And then so I met her at I think American University at a show, and I was doing poems, and she was like, "There's this thing called Kollaboration, and there's a bunch of Asians." And I was like, "All right, let's do it. I could win some money or something." And then that was actually a huge moment for me in really connecting to the Asian American arts community.
So that was like prior to 2012. Then you were kind of doing your own thing in Carolina, maybe going around the country, but you weren't really plugged into the Asian American arts community until then, right?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, through the poetry community, yes. So by that point I had connected to poets from Hawaii,
right?
Poets in the Bay, somewhat connected to poets through the Asian American Poetry Summit that I didn't get to attend back then, but, was meeting OG poets who were like, "Son, you don't have a haiku? Like, you need to write a haiku." And I was like, all right, I'll write a haiku. So, it was slowly sort of transforming at that time. But, yeah, nonetheless, there's this very small demographic of Asian American poets, and especially 6-7 years ago.
Right. And everybody knows each other.
Everyone knows each other. All the poets know each other themselves anyways, and
right.
So all the Asian poets are clearly can clearly see you right there. So yeah, and actually Kollaboration was great because it also was one of the first times I really interacted with other art forms in a supportive space and competitive space too. So
right.
It was one of those first times I was able to like kind of knuckle up with other artists and see how my art and my performance kind of stacked up against singers and dancers. And
so you competed in DC first, and then got all the way to the
right.
Like, what is it, the Collaboration like Star or something?
That's Collaboration Star, yeah.
And that was
a
American Idol,
yeah,
type thing.
It really was some American Idol, Asian American Idol. That's when I met PK, and I met a lot of kind of heavy people out in LA and just around the country. Doing Asian American arts. So
before we talked about how you got to LA, how did you go from Durham to DC? What brought you to Washington?
Man, I was just I was a kid basically. I was 21. I had kind of dipped out of community college. I was really trying to find out what was next. I was broke. I didn't have a car, job, place to live really. And it wasn't that bad. I'm making it sound bad, but maybe it was mentally.
Yeah. You got to exaggerate a little bit, for the story, for the drama.
Right. Actually, though, when I got to D.C., it was a bit tough because I lived in this. So, I moved to D.C. because I met folks. I had homies who were there who were poets who ran a poetry organization called Split This Rock. Mm-hmm. And if you look into them, they're great, amazing poetry organization, putting on youth poetry festivals. And so they had a job working there, teaching workshops after school. For like $500 a month, and then there was this like room that opened up in this row house that was like $500 a month. So it was this kind of mystic moment where it was like, oh man, I think I'm supposed to move. I think I'm supposed to go do this. So I went, and the room had no windows. It was like this itty bitty tiny joint that was on top of the floor beneath. It was like the heating unit or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so in wintertime, the floor got like, super hot sauna. It was just kind of crazy time. But at the time I learned how to walk places. I learned how to ride my bike around the city, learned how to use public transportation. I was living outside of home and getting it. So I was hosting at Busboys and Poets at the time as well, teaching workshops, and just kind of rounding out those edges as an organizer, as a teacher, as a performer, as a host.
So this was about, 5 years ago, 2011 or so?
2012.
This was all like within the course of a year when you moved to DC and hit big on a Collaboration Star. That was all within the course of the same year?
Yeah, I moved there in April, and then I auditioned, I think, in June, and then the show was September.
Oh, wow.
And then
that's a whirlwind.
And then, yeah, it was crazy, actually, if I think about it. And then this Collaboration Star was in November. It was on my birthday.
Oh, when's your birthday?
So it was November 16th.
Get out of here. I'm November 17th.
No way.
Yo, man, I'm telling you, I knew there was, as I was hip to you, I was like, I got to talk to this dude, because we're like basically the same person.
Right. Oh, that's nuts.
A generation apart, but
right.
But yeah, so you knew exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about the DMV. Then, if you was
Right.
up in DC for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So what made you take the leap and say, you know what, fuck the South, I gotta live in LA?
I guess. Well, it wasn't fuck the South when I first moved to DC. Yeah. But I had already made that move as far as that tough move when you first leave home.
Right.
And I had been traveling so much at that time that it wasn't a big move, like ideologically in my head, it wasn't a big move. And so, like I said, my sister went to school out here, and so I've always, since I was a kid, I was like, oh man, I can't wait till I move out here. It's like, I already knew. And actually, it was supposed to be the Bay. I really love the Bay. Really wanted to go to the Bay at the time, but I think my life was kind of deciding whether I was going to go more arts and activism and teaching and youth empowerment, or more arts and entertainment. I think my life sort of naturally chose entertainment, and I sort of wanted. I owed it to myself to fulfill my dream of being on the biggest stage and reaching the most amount of people I can. And also I had great mentors here. So Bosia, I don't know if you're familiar with.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, legend.
Yeah, definitely a legend. I gotta get him on the podcast too, because
yeah. Oklahoma.
He's from Oklahoma. Oklahoma counts, man.
Yeah,
Oklahoma counts.
Yep, and so he was a big part and reason why I moved out here. Just knowing that he's a figure in my life who's given me amazing advice and guidance along the way. And so, it was just kind of a natural transition for me, honestly.
So I want to back up a bit, because as I mentioned earlier, one of the other, the first things I connected with you over was this track Dining Room.
Mama waiting tables, Papa in the kitchen, Emily was hostess, I was doing dishes, we was trying to make a living on the come up. I'ma stay true no matter what I do. Raised in a family serving food. Just made sure I wasn't in a dining room. Cause mama waiting tables. Papa in the kitchen. Emily was hostess. I was doing dishes. We was trying to make a living on the come up. I'ma stay true no matter what I do. Cause I was raised in a family serving food. Just made sure I wasn't in a dining room. Mama always had a dream that she could speak English. Translating in America.
Did your family ran a restaurant? Is that an autobiographical song?
Yeah, definitely.
Because that's another thing.
31 years. Mm-hmm.
They ran the restaurant. Was that in Durham as well?
Yep.
Talk about that a little bit, just that experience. Because again, as a fellow, growing up in a restaurant, I know you wasn't allowed in the dining room, but me and my brother. My little 9-year-old brother was the cashier and shit, and people were I'm surprised no one ever reported us to child services. But yeah, you're doing the dishes, busting tables. The other thing about, I think, what I want to talk about, kind of growing up in the South, I feel like is there's definitely I don't even know blue collar is the right word, but there's definitely a working class kind of vibe to it that isn't usually present in a lot of typical Asian American narratives, right? Where my mom wasn't a tiger mom because she didn't have time to be a tiger mom. Yeah. Her thing was you do well in school, but make sure your ass is at the restaurant on time.
Right.
We didn't have time for extracurricular, because we was we didn't study for the SAT because we was busting tables. So talk about that difference in terms of what it's like coming up, learning that work ethic, right? Because working in a restaurant, your folks put in 22-hour days, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, for me, it's, I had an interesting experience. My parents, similar to yours, kind of opposite of yours, the time that they spent and had to sacrifice at the restaurant made me so isolated and sort of having to find creativity on my own. So I would often come to the restaurant, be in the back. Well, I was kind of a mischievous kid too, right? So I wasn't, even if they wanted me to work, I would just be eating and just, I would wash dishes and I would help out, but it wasn't, they knew where my mind was, right? I was a really play hard kind of kid. So that's where a lot of my creativity developed. And, I think when I was growing up, we had a very, my dad was really sort of living this kind of classic American dream sort of idea. The restaurant was doing very well, just classic Japanese kind of steakhouse kind of thing.
Right.
After a series of events, my pops was diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
Right before that, I had been in foster home because my pops was really had really heavy hands, really, really strict sort of discipline.
Right.
And so, and then my sister went to college, and then 2001, you know, the economy crashed after 9/11, sort of within the restaurant business. It really suffered. And so then everything didn't crumble in a sense.
Right.
But, you know, it definitely was a major shift in our life. But because of all the work they had done, and sort of that's how I learned about credit and what credit does and how credit can save you if you do whatever.
Right.
And so, you know, in recent years, they've been transforming it more so into like fine Japanese dining, and they only serve 4 people a night.
Oh, wow.
My dad, it's a 8-course meal. It's kaiseki, traditional Japanese style food.
Oh, interesting.
And it sort of brought back the art and genuine cultural aspect of it. I think it's always been there, but there was definitely a bit of that, you know, sacrificing a piece of your culture to be able to just survive and adhere to the palate of whatever area you're in. The question was, what?
It wasn't really a question. It was just like talk about growing up in Russia. But I did want to, you know, I did think it was interesting because I didn't realize your parents ran a Japanese steakhouse. Because one of the things, like my parents, we ran, you know, Americanized Chinese food joint, and you know, like I used to get mad at folk, especially like other Asian folk who try to clown like Americanized Chinese food, like as saying it's inauthentic or whatnot. Because I used to, like, I would tell people, I still tell people this, that shit was authentic to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have the luxury of going down to the dim sum spot. So for me, like General Tso's chicken and like chicken wings and fried rice is like what was Chinese food to me. And I guess like,
that's an interesting conversation too. Yeah.
You know, for you too, like you kind of came up where like they weren't really doing authentic Japanese food necessarily.
Right.
Like was that hard to reconcile? Or did you like put a wall and say, you know what, that's for white folk. We're gonna.
Well, no, there's both. There's both because you have to. It's the same as being alive in a person, right? Like in America, that's just the way this sort of whole culture is set up. Like you're not going to be able to speak your language all the time if you're trying to connect with people who are from here,
right?
And so, yeah, did we have Carolina Hurricane rolls and Blue Devil rolls and Tar Heel rolls? Yes. Were there chicken wings? Yes, but there also was tempura. There also was udon, and that shit was bomb, right? And it was an authentic piece to it. And so, you know, have you seen that documentary about General Tso's chicken?
Yeah. Where they go all over the country.
I like that. Did you like that film?
Yeah, I love that movie, man.
It was very insightful.
Well, I think because it also it speaks to our nature, right? Like with this idea that even the whole notion of being Asian American is about finding that space between authenticity and adaptation, right? I don't want to say assimilation, but like adaptation.
Right. That's a great word.
Because that's what you have to do. You have to adapt. And like you said, I feel like this is kind of like the almost like the opposite conversation we were having, or the other side of the conversation we were having about appropriation. This like notion of authenticity. Right. Is a real like tricky thing to kind of wrap your head around sometimes. Because again, being an Asian person in America, what is authentic? All I know that's authentic is my experience. So for me, authentic is like, you know, I grew up on the back of a pickup truck for the first 10 years of my life. How do I get my Asian card revoked for that? You know what I mean? So like, right. So yeah, it's like that is that juxtaposition between authenticity and assimilation. I think that I think as Asian Americans you struggle with. Like it's not a zero sum game. You can't be completely authentic. Right. Because if you were, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be speaking English.
Right. Well, then I mean, the conversation I think changes and sort of is what is authentic and
exactly.
I think I want to. In the years that I've been able to mature after thinking about all of this, is sort of not overlooking the power of yielding both, you know, of having to be the power and sort of that's that mutant shit, you know, it's a
superpower,
right.
The show is called Southern Fried Asian, and one of the signature things about coming up in the South is the food we ate, and it's just a natural segue from talking about, you know, growing up in your family's restaurant, my family's restaurant, and thinking about like the food that you eat, because I think if there's two things that are true about being in the South and being Asian, is that food is a vital part of both cultures.
Right.
For Chinese folk, like, we don't even say "How are you?" We say "Have you eaten yet?" You know.
That's fire.
So as an Asian person growing up in the South, and I know you talk about teriyaki chicken and fried chicken, but like, is there a specific dish that just makes you think about home? It doesn't. It don't have to be like. It don't have to be fusion. It don't have to be Asian. It could be. It could be like Carolina barbecue, like in the song.
Right. They're really easy answers, man. Definitely just fried chicken. Throw some honey on that mug. You know. Definitely pulled pork sandwiches with slaw. Definitely
with the Carolina barbecue, because that's the thing.
Carolina barbecue is
people sleep on Carolina barbecue, man.
It's different from what you would imagine.
That's shit I grew up with, because like I grew up in Hampton Roads, so we just hop over the border, go down to the Outer Banks, get you some like vinegar based barbecue.
Yep.
That's the real shit.
Killer, yo.
I don't think Virginia don't got barbecue.
What Virginia got?
I don't. Virginia got ham. We got ham. Oh, yeah? We got that
honey
smoked
baked ham and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I mean that, and just Japanese comfort food, curry, and teriyaki chicken, of course, katsu, and udon, ramen, shit like that.
You get that katsu curry, man.
Oh man, katsu.
Well, and then
I'm in LA now. It's like, whenever I want it.
Yo, the karage is the bomb too, though. Like, it's Japanese crazy. Know how to fry some
Honestly,
chicken.
Though, man, Korean fried chicken is really up there, bro.
Man, Asians do, like, we got the fried chicken game on lock, though.
Right. Well, we're great with sodium, and salt,
Salt and batter. Stick that shit in the fryer.
Right.
Man, this has been an amazing conversation, and I want to just thank you for being one of my first guests on Southern Fried. I almost said Southern Fried Chicken. See, I'm getting hungry now.
Right. It's an honor, man. Yeah. This was a great conversation, man.
So where can folks find you on the internet if they want to hear more from you?
So everything's G Yamazawa. The website is gyamazawa.com. All my social media is G Yamazawa. Facebook is a good place. I'll be dropping content on Facebook as well. YouTube, all of that, and yeah, I'm out there. As long as you can spell it, man, you should be able to get there. So,
and the album "Shouts of Durham" is on iTunes. Anywhere else?
iTunes, Spotify. About to throw it up on SoundCloud. Finally, yeah, you can find it everywhere.
And is there another album coming?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the plan. Hopefully, some like interim projects as well. Just some fun stuff, and definitely more videos and. Who knows? Maybe a children's book, some things like that. So,
hey, let me know if you want to work on a comic book together.
I'm with it, man. I'm with it.
Let's do it. Well, it's been a pleasure. Good luck to you in the future, and good luck to you in all your endeavors. And I appreciate you being on the show.
All right, thank you so much, man.
Big thanks once again to G Yamazawa for kicking it with us here on Southern Fried Asian. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. If you subscribe to us, please rate and review us so other folks can find us. Follow us on Twitter at Southern Asians. You can follow me on Twitter at The Real Chow. Until next week, keep it Southern Fried, y'all.